Почитувани гледачи, заедно сме во ова интервју со нашата гостинка со која што ќе разговараме за различни теми поврзани пред се и над се за ЛГБТ и движењата, но дополнително и околу ситуацијата со маргинализираните групи во општествата. Конкретно, можеби ќе се зафатиме со одредени прашања во текот на ова интервју кои што се поврзани со Македонија, но дополнително ќе опфатиме и прашања кои се поврзани многу со Западниот Балкан, Балканот воопшто, но и генерално ситуацијата во Европскиот парламент, дополнително и со се она што се случува околу порастот на дискриминацијата, говорот на омраза, но и работи кои што се поврзани со несогласувањата на земјите членки во Европската Унија. Настрана од сето тоа, заедно со нашата денешна гостинка, разговараме и за правата, но и дигиталниот свет воопштено, за сите предизвици кои што новото време и дигиталната ера ни ги носат. Со нас во овој разговор е Ким ван Спарентак, која што е европратеничка или членка на Европскиот парламент, доаѓа од групата на Зелените и со која што разговараме токму за овие прашања. Kim, thank you very much for taking the time to be with us and to take this interview. And I'm truly happy that you managed to find the time slot so we can talk about these issues, which I consider to be very important, especially when it comes to the LGBT movements and the hate speech and the rights of the marginalized communities in this region.
Thank you.
You're member of the European Greens, and you're here in Macedonia about the debate that you had with the National Assembly, but also to be part of the Pride. And can you please tell me what kind of main sentences sticked up to your head from the debate that you had with the non-governmental organizations, with the civic society and the parliament?
Yeah, so I'm myself a member of the European Parliament, where we also have an LGBTI intergroup. So it was really great to be, part of the meeting this morning of your LGBTI intergroup, where the civil society organizations were. And I think what really struck me is the amount of progress that you have made here in terms of legislation. And how it now is, you're still struggling to see it all being implemented on the ground, and how it, works out on the ground. And, you can have so many steps towards equality, but then before society also evolves along with those laws, that takes a while. So that was something that was very interesting to hear, seeing that I'm from a country that was, of course, a pioneer when it comes to LGBTI rights. But now it's stalling. We don't.
How come it's stalling?
Well, we've had some parties in our government, some conservative parties, who said, okay, we can agree on certain things, but no further steps when it comes to LGBTI rights, unfortunately. And at the same time, in the Netherlands, we have the same issues as here. We see an increase in hate speech, for example, online and offline. So in that sense, there's no progress.
So you can learn from us.
Actually, we can. No, and I'm not even joking. What you're doing here when it comes to equality bodies, that you actually have a place to go when you're suffering from hate speech or hate crimes. Here in Skopje, it's pretty cool. We don't have that in the Netherlands, and might surprise you, but we don't. I'm here also to learn as a Dutch citizen. And what struck me as well was to see, and I think that is the beautiful thing about an LGBTI intergroup, that people from every different political value, or from not every, but many, get together and say, okay, we might not agree on the way we would like to see social affairs or economic affairs arranged, but we all want human rights, dignity, and equal rights for everyone. And I think that's always creates a very beautiful situation.
When we are making a comparison, let's say, to your society and our society, when you see the connection between the national institutions here in Macedonia and your national institutions back in the Netherlands, but also in the European Parliament as well, do they have a connection like the one we have here when it comes to the national institutions and the civic society and the non-governmental organizations? Because we have to work a lot together so we can succeed? So, because you already mentioned that you have sort of problems now, or problematization of the society, do you probably think that you should take some kind of situation of learning these things together?
Yeah, I think when it comes to the European Parliament, we speak a lot with civil society organizations, also to get a feel of the differences in the different countries. We invite civil society organizations to the Parliament very often, so I think there we actually do that, and we actually try to see where we can strengthen each other, but also to learn from each other. You know, if some progressive law is implemented in one country, how did you do it, and how can we make sure it happens everywhere in Europe? When it comes to the Netherlands, I think there are conversations between the civil society organizations and the government, but less than there used to be. I can explain you the whole problematic situation of the fact that we now have 20 parties in a very small parliament, and there's not much time to focus on everything, and that also affects the contact that there is with civil society. But I think in general, you know, it is very important to not at some point feel, and I think that is a tendency that we have in the Netherlands, we already have equal marriage for 20 years, you know, everyone is now equal, you know, whereas actually, if you actually look at, you know, where we are at in terms of, for example, the ILGA rainbow map and the rainbow index, we're not there yet. We don't have reached equality yet when it comes to LGBTI rights. So it's very important to see, you know, that, you know, you've taken a lot of steps here, and that you're like, okay, but this is definitely not enough. We're going to push and push and push until we really have equal rights for everyone. And I think as a society that has been the pioneer and is now stalling, we can really learn from you.
I don't know that if you maybe have the same experience, but for example, whenever we are talking about human rights here, especially LGBT rights or women's rights or other marginalized communities, whenever you put that out in the public, the comments usually are, oh, now it's not the time for that. We have more difficult matters to tackle on, and so on and so on. So what would you say to those kind of comments?
I think those comments come from a fear of having to share the cake of equality. And I think...
I love that.
Yeah, and I think...
Cake of equality.
Yeah, and I think it is not true that you know, that if someone else gets more right, you get less rights. And I think one of the ways that you can really show it, how we are doing it in the LGBTIQ community, for the longest time we just had a rainbow flag, right? A regular rainbow flag. And then we're like, okay, so now we see that there's some people in the community who are, you know, not completely represented by the community, so we are improving our rainbow flag. We added the progress flag, we added the trans flag into it, and also the black and the brown colors. And you're like, oh wait, but now we're missing out on the intersex group, and now the intersex flag is also part of it. And I think the flag only became more beautiful, and it creates a place where, like, oh no, we are bigger, and we're even more colorful and more beautiful together. And I think if we can, in society, also look at equal rights, like we as LGBTI community are looking at our flag, I think that would, you know, be actually how it should be, and how we can actually show that equal rights are something that everyone benefits from, and the world becomes more beautiful and colorful.
One of the main things that usually the European Parliament is giving us an exclamation mark when it comes to their reports is the issues of human rights, especially hate speech, but especially human rights, even though maybe Macedonia is a little bit much more further in taking these matters into consideration. But what is the situation of, let's say, the countries of the Balkan, of the Western Balkan, when it comes to LGBT and human rights?
Well, I think when we're looking at the situation, I mean, I don't know about every country in the Balkans so much.
I'm not asking particularly, in general.
But what I think we're seeing is the same as everywhere, unfortunately, which is that in the end, there's more visibility now for LGBTI people, for the community, that we are becoming more vocal. And I think, you know, the role that young people on the internet are playing, I feel so old saying this, but it's really true. You know, we are connected, and we see we're not alone. You know, when I was a teenager, I didn't realize that there were that many LGBTI people as the people who now have access to the internet will be able to see, you know, and this feeling of not being alone gives you the strength of being more vocal, and I think that is also the power of pride, you know, the feeling that you're not alone. And I think that the fact that so many young people are saying, hey, there's a lot of diversity in the world, and I can be proud and I can be out about it, creates a situation where there's more visibility, and at the same time we see more hate speech coming up. And it's not actually, I don't believe the group of people that are against the LGBTI community is growing, but their voices are getting stronger because they don't like it. And I think, you know, like in everywhere in Europe, also in the Balkans, we see that this hate speech is growing, and it's really also fueled by the algorithms of social media. And I think that is something that we have to be very careful with, because it's not a coincidence that, you know, we see more hate. We see that there's a big anti-gender movement funded by conservative groups in the United States, in Russia, and other places. And we have to be wary about that, and we have to make sure that you know, we look at it not only as, oh, there's just a group of, you know, people that have a certain religion who don't like it, but it's like, okay, there's actually an organized activity against the LGBTI community and all the progress we have made in the past decades, which, if you look at, you know, the situation we were at 50 years ago anywhere in the world, it's incredible. They want to reverse it, and, you know, we're not going to let that happen, and we have to just be very clear that we have to really look and tackle at this, you know, disinformation and hate speech that is happening online and how it reflects in our society.
I'm asking these questions because when we were reading through the French proposition that they gave us on the situation with the veto that Bulgaria has given for Macedonia, one of those main things mentioned many times within that text were hate speech and tackling hate speech, and also marginalized communities and marginalized people. So I'm asking this because we see the rise of hate speech, not only Balkan but also some other European members countries, and that is why I'm interested in these debates and discussions that you have within the European Parliament with your colleagues, other MPs, coming from those countries where the situation is declining.
Yeah, it is very interesting to have these discussions. Unfortunately, for example, in Poland, the majority of the MEPs is also from the political party, is not a great ally, to say the least. And yeah, we also experience the same kind of hate speech within the parliament. When we have a debate about the LGBTI rights, when we have a debate about gender equality, about abortion rights, there's a lot of hate speech, you know, also just spoken out in the parliament. And very often that's really, you know, a copy paste of the kind of disinformation and hate we see happening online. So it is complicated, but what is interesting is when you speak with people who are on the side of the community from these countries, they are so determined. And, you know, the interesting thing is that most of the time you see that, you know, for example, in Hungary, where they now have this anti-LGBTI law, when you look at the population, they're not against LGBTI people, and they don't feel that you know, the LGBTI world is taking over the country. You know, if you just look at opinion polls, they're in favor of equality. So it is very positive, actually, also to speak with them, to hear that, you know, to hear how they are representing actually a majority of the people. But it is something that is interesting, and I think it is also very interesting in what it means for my role, and it really makes me think about my role, because I realized that, you know, when you are, for example, you are from an LGBTI-free zone in Poland, you grow up there, and like your government, local government is saying you're not welcome here, and then your national government is saying, yeah, and that's fine that someone is saying you're not welcome here. But then there is a European Parliament that says you are welcome in this society, and we will fight for your rights, and we will talk with your government, we will talk with your local government and tell them it's not okay how they're treating you, and we will fight for equal rights for you. It creates an extra layer of security for them, and I realized that's a big role that I, as an out member of the European Parliament, play.
Because on one side you have the anti-LGBT movement in Hungary, you have the problematization of the abortion rights in Poland, and then you have other countries also having these kind of issues. And that is why I was asking about this. So what do you think that we should do, as societies, let's say we as Europeans, all of us, should do towards improving the situation? What is the main thing that we should focus on, probably?
I think there's
I know it's difficult to find only one, but let's say two.
Well, I think one thing that is really important is, and I think that has become something widespread, that it's always, you always need to hear two sides of a story. You know, and I mean, I'm a green, so climate change is a great example here. You know, 99.99999% of the scientists have said we're in a climate crisis and it's bad and we might not make it to 1.5 degrees, which means drama. And then there's like this one person who also read one thing about the climate who says, no, I don't believe in climate change. And for some reason, we have created a system where those two opinions are treated the same. And you also see that happening in debates on gender. You see that happening on debates on LGBTI rights. You have pro and against, and that is exactly the same. But, you know, the pro people are trying to live their life and try to get equal rights. And the against people just don't like that. And that is a very different fight you're fighting, and it's a very different discussion to have. And I think as a society, we have to be more willing to listen to each other to a certain extent, and to not see everything as black and white, because the world isn't black and white. It's very colorful, and I think that's something we have to realize.
It is a good thing that you mentioned colorful and not being black and white, because probably also the situation that we are facing now as a country with our eastern neighbor Bulgaria is also not so black and white as it is represented. Yeah. So after us refusing the French proposition, our government and the Bulgarians accepting it, what is your, let's say, stand as an MP, as a member of the European Parliament on, let's say, this situation?
Well, I mean, as Greens, we are, you know, very in favor of you joining us, because you are part of our European family. That's it. And we've seen that you've done a lot of work and you're ready for the talks, you know. And it is really, yeah, it's not okay that suddenly one member state has decided that a bilateral problem that you can fix between the two countries should be part of the whole negotiation now and of the whole package. And I think that is something that, you know, is something that's happening in the EU right now. Not only in this case, you know, we see Hungary blackmailing the new tax legislation, and et cetera, et cetera. It's happening everywhere. But especially about a topic where you're just saying, well, thank you, North Macedonia, for making so much effort to get here. But now there's one country who doesn't really like it. I think that's really not okay. So definitely from the Greens, we will keep on pushing as much as we can to make sure that the Council takes a proper position on this. And also, I just want to speak out my solidarity and say, okay, you know, we want you to be part of our family, and we hope that you won't lose the faith in us to at some point be there for you. And I can't wait for you to be part of our family. I just found out that you hand out espressos to everyone all the time, just as part of courtesy. I mean, we need you. We need you in the European Union. I love it.
Because I'm asking this because I'm also interested in I'm still at the espresso part. I'm also interested in the moment of the viewpoint of the EU accession in general, because I think that the situation became so much problematic for new countries to be part of the EU, because the technicalities around the EU accession part became more difficult and much more stronger and stronger, even not for us, but for the new countries too. It's like Ukraine and Moldova from a few days ago.
Yeah, it's true. And I think,
do you think that probably some things should be changed?
What I think is that we are seeing that, we have a rule of law problem within the European Union. We just have to acknowledge that both Hungary and Poland are not adhering to the rule of law. And perhaps we have to also look back and be like, did we already see this coming when we made them a member? And were we too much like, just join and we'll see later what you do with your rule of law? And I think that is now creating a political situation where, we're more cautious and where we are saying, okay, we're really scrutinizing every state that wants to become a member, more thoroughly. And I think that makes sense because what we're seeing right now in Hungary and Poland, and that we can't really do anything about it, creates a situation where it's really difficult, and also it's very difficult to explain, like, okay, no, but we'll be a bit more relaxed on new members joining, while we're having this situation with Hungary and Poland. So I think it's a much bigger political situation. But then we're also seeing indeed that now we have two new candidate members, of course, where the political situation asked for a speed up procedure, and I think that it is an important step we took. It is a good step we took, but we have to still be very frank that before, like, they're now a candidate member, but before we can actually start talking about them really becoming a full member, it's gonna take a while, and that is, we have to be realistic about that, and not just be like, we'll all be fine. If that is what we're saying to these countries that are now wanting to become a member, we're not honest, and it's not how it's going to happen. So I think it's very important that we're honest, but also that we're fair. And I think that what is happening now with North Macedonia and Albania is not fair. We have to look at the progress you've made, and when we look, you're ready now to start the accession talks, then there's not, there shouldn't suddenly be a political reason to not have that.
When we were talking about the colorful part and not being black and white, you've been also very vocal a year ago when Donald Trump was taken off Facebook and Twitter.
Yeah.
And your comments weren't in the context of what everybody were expecting, probably.
Probably.
And then maybe you've also been considered as a person who is fighting for the rights of Donald Trump. So let's explain a little bit about that.
Yes, I work a lot on digital affairs and on the internet. And what we are seeing, and I think the reason why we see more hate speech online is because these big organizations, the Facebook and the Google basically, they have all the power online. They decide what you and I get to see. And we get to see based what their shareholders want. And what their shareholders want is more money. And they have figured out, with the help of psychologists and some smart finance people, that if they show us extreme content that creates clicks, you click on it because what the hell did Donald Trump say again? Or interaction, why did he say that? I am angry now. Those are the most successful posts. So what you're seeing is that the algorithm filters the things that they think that you will interact with or click on, because that makes them the most money, because then they can show more advertising. So this is how the system works. Donald Trump is, of course, a great example of someone who tweets stuff that either people will click on or interact with. So yes, it's very problematic that he became so big thanks to those algorithms. However, the moment that Facebook and Twitter decided by themselves to take him offline, first of all, I think it was late, but also I don't think they should have decided that. It shouldn't be up to these companies that are the internet for most people now to decide what we can see and what we cannot see. And that's why I've been working really hard on legislation in the European Parliament, and we now have a deal where that's not going to be the case anymore. It's going to be independent judges. We're going to look at the rule of law. We're going to look at, hey, is he actually discriminating? Is he, putting racist stuff online? That's not allowed. That's illegal. Then he should be taken offline. But it shouldn't be up to these platforms who were like, because they like Donald Trump on their platform, because Donald Trump made them a lot of money, and it should be up to them and whether they make money of someone who is, preaching hate or, creating division in society to decide whether someone can be online or not.
But aren't we getting into the gray zone of this situation where even though the European Union as a sui generis organization, union is a political entity. So a political entity getting into business stuffs and economy stuffs, it's a little bit of how should they work do their job and what should they do with their members on their applications. It's a little bit grayish as a zone for me.
No, because in principle there are things that are illegal. And the things that are illegal offline are illegal online. That's how we have organized the world. If we say that that all LGBTI people shouldn't be in this world, that's, and this is how I'm going to do it, that's a threat towards a community, that's not allowed, that should be taken offline. And that it's very clear. And of course, then it's not, up to the platform to say it's not the platform's fault that someone is saying it, but they have to act and have to recognize, hey, that's illegal. Of course, there is a gray zone. There is a zone where it's not completely clear whether something is discrimination, hate, or threat. Now, the case is that if you then say, hey, someone is threatening me, and Facebook is like, meh, I don't think he's threatening you. Meanwhile, you are getting death threats at home, you don't feel safe anymore, but Facebook is like, meh, then we have a problem. And it should be up to a judge to decide whether something is okay or not. Because we live in a world, in a democracy, where we have decided, we have judges, we have the system that can actually decide what is okay or not in our society. That's what we have agreed with each other. And it shouldn't be up to the shareholders in Silicon Valley to decide. And I think it makes a lot of sense that we as a European Union work on this because, they are so big. We have to work together. And we have one internal digital market. We have one internal market in general, and the digital market is also internal. And we as a bloc stand way more strong against these big platforms than we are on our own.
I've been asking this because whenever you see articles or statements by these big companies like Facebook, like Google, like YouTube, and so on, there is always the situation where they talk about the global market and Europe. Because I think that only the continent of Europe, especially European Union, is the only one that is tackling these issues against them.
Yeah.
Far.
Yes, this is true. But what is very interesting, and I find it the most fascinating part of European
politics. And I think that they're very surprised by this because they feel Europe as their own, but now their own is against them.
So basically what Facebook does, so what they did, for example, we have privacy rules, the privacy regulation. Facebook did everything they could to weaken that legislation, so they didn't have to adhere to too many rules. So now we have still a very good legislation, I would say. And now it's really frustrating for Facebook that they have to adhere to this rule in Europe and not to that rule anywhere else. So now they're lobbying in the United States to get that rule in the United States. And I think this is what is very interesting about the European Union, that we set one rule and it becomes something that, because we are such a big market, becomes interesting for companies to actually start lobbying for elsewhere. And I'm actually really positive that when we're talking about this new internet legislation, where we are talking about these mechanisms on how, they have to deal with hate online, for example, that might also become a rule that they will start calling for in other countries.
We're nearly at the end of the interview. I just want to go back at the beginning with my last questions. So when we're talking about the digital situation, when we are talking about all the social networks and the hate speech and etc., even if you do have, and there are statistics that can support that, where the hate speech and especially the marginalization became even stronger just because of social media. But also social media was the one that helped of any civic society to be more vocal, and especially members of parliaments and activists to be more vocal towards this. So we are probably in the middle of some kind of a new world era and a war in between, where both things have risen.
Yes, that's completely true. I mean, let's be honest, without the internet, the Me Too movement wouldn't have, become such a big movement everywhere. And I think it's amazing. And I think that part of the internet we have to preserve. The internet is amazing. The only problem is that right now there's just a few companies who have decided we are the internet, we're going to take over everything, and we decide based on what makes us the most money, what you can see. And yeah, these algorithms, it's one of my main fights right now, is to make sure they are not allowed to use those algorithms anymore. With the war in Ukraine, we saw that all the Russian disinformation, it worked super well in these algorithms. Why don't you turn those algorithms off then? We know that there are algorithms that don't spread hate as much. We had the Facebook whistleblower Frances Haugen in the European Parliament explaining it very clearly that they can put another algorithm where you don't see the extreme messages all the time, but you still see what you like. It just makes them less money. And that's why we have to regulate them and make sure that the internet is not in the hands anymore of these powerful companies, but comes back in the hands of the people. Because if the internet is in the hands of the people, we can do amazing things, we can start revolutions, we can do things that are beautiful, we can have solidarity with each other. And that's the internet I want, just like the world I actually want.
It is quite rare the opportunity to have an interview with a member of the Greens, and not talking about climate change or green politics and policies. And it's really weird to me now, because we haven't even tackled any of those issues, but they're still the most important issues for the Greens in Europe, right? Like here on the top level.
We're trying to combat climate change, but if we manage, and I say if because we're still at the forefront of the fight, and there's still other groups in the parliament who don't want to go towards the 1.5 degrees, then we still need to have a nice world. So we cannot fight for only one thing. And what I think is so amazing about green politics, it's not per se only about the environment. What green politics stands for is for a better future, or at least not a worse future for future generations. And of course, the first thing we have to fight then is climate change, and for our biodiversity to not decline. But at the same time, we also want progress, and we want equal rights, and we want the current generation to have more rights and to have better social protection and more security. And those two things don't go beyond each other. If we don't tackle polarization in society through these algorithms and the internet, there will be a bigger group of people that starts believing climate change is just a hoax. If we don't make sure that we have better social security for everyone, and people feel like, oh, the climate things are only expensive and I will never be able to keep up, we will never make the climate transition possible, and especially not in a fair and just way as we've always wanted. So one fight doesn't go without the other, and indeed, making sure we survive as a humanity, clearly a priority, because otherwise there's no humanity left. But those fights go hand in hand with making sure our societies become more secure, become better, and in the end we have a climate-friendly world and equal rights. And
one last question, even though I had to stop minutes ago. Why do pride parades matter? Because here in Balkans we are still tackling and fighting with the wording of why should you parade with your need for rights or anything, or you should parade with those atrocities in front of me?
Two reasons. One reason is pride is a protest, and we don't have equal rights, and we're protesting because we want equal rights, and it's not fair that we don't have equal rights. Secondly, it is the moment for our community to get together and see that we're not alone and show we're not alone and that we're not just one weird person, but we're actually a big group of people that are all, beautiful individuals. And it's a moment where, I think that's really the power. Like when I see people who are on their first Pride, it reminds me of my first Pride. And it was this moment, this eye-opening moment where I was like, wow, I'm not alone. Actually, there are thousands of me, and that's amazing. And that should be there for everyone.
Thank you very much for taking the time for this interview.
Thank you so much.